humans, since the dawn of time, we've always wanted to increase productivity and efficiency. We go from fishing nets to fishing boats. We go from horse and cart to cars. And each time we kind of go through this technological leap, we increase productivity, we increase efficiency. The perfect example of that would be something like Netflix versus Blockbuster. We've gone from having to drive down to Blockbuster, spending time and energy, gas, getting to Blockbuster, trying to decide on which movie do I want to rent, spending 30, 40 minutes trying to figure out the movie, renting the movie, driving back home, watching the movie, driving back to Blockbuster, dropping off the movie, driving back home. And so all of that time, energy, money, gas that went into watching one movie. And then you see Netflix, where for basically the cost of one movie, you've got millions of movies at your fingertips. So you're seeing the increase in efficiency, productivity gains from technology. Now, what that means is that prices should be falling as human ingenuity is thriving. Prices should be pushing, basic technology should be pushing prices down. But the problem is we increase the money supply at a greater rate than technology is driving down prices. So what that means is we as consumers, we as the average individual never actually get to benefit to basically the extent we could do for technology driving down prices. So that's what I'm saying when our natural society, or as Jeff Booth says, our natural society is deflationary. It's inherently deflationary because people want to strive to get more for less. However, there's this pushback from kind of the Keynesian economists, from kind of the traditional financial system, which is, well, if prices actually fell, what that means, you could say, is that your purchasing power is increasing. So if your purchasing power is increasing, you're going to be incentivized to save. If you're going to be incentivized to save, you're not going to be contributing to society. You're going to hoard your money and society will grind to a halt. Now, that is true under the Keynesian lens, where we've got a debt-based system. If people stop consuming and you've got all of these corporations that have massive debt on their balance sheets, if all of a sudden their top line revenue starts to drop because people start saving, they're going to be fiscally constrained and they're probably going to wither away and they're going to die out. And we're going to go through this huge wave of defaults throughout society. And so I absolutely believe in a debt-based inflationary system, deflation is massively destabilizing. However, I think once we move through into an inherently deflationary system, once we've kind of rid the world of a lot of this fiscal irresponsibility, a lot of this debt, what you realize is there's just a lot less capital going towards consumerism and people are able to save more, which means their quality of life improves. It means their cost of living falls instead of rises, which means people have greater capacity. And what I think that means from my perspective, and more of a philosophical perspective, is that I think we grow on a deeper spiritual level. Because if people have greater capacity and their cost of living is falling, yes, there's less consumerism, which means there's going to be less corporations out there vying for people's attention. But it also means that if people have more capacity to look inwards, they're going to be able to ask themselves, like, what is actually important to me? And realize that it's not the biggest house. It is not all of these external goods and things, the Lamborghini, the Rolex that make me happy. Actually, it is the connections, the contributions, and the challenges that we discussed earlier. And so I think that you could argue that, yes, deflation is destabilizing, but I would argue that that's in an inflationary system, a big debt-based system, because deflationary squeezes margins and we could see a massive wipe through or wash through of kind of defaults. However, if we move through that period and we actually get to a world where prices are falling, I think it creates a very different dynamic. People are always going to spend money because we have to survive. People are always going to spend money because we have to eat. People are always going to spend money because the joy of going out and doing something with our partner, with our friends, our family, exceeds the benefit of saving an extra day or 2 days or an extra week. And so I think that there will always be money being spent. I think there'll just be a lot less money being spent.
In your eyes, how does Bitcoin, we're talking about obviously reshaping behavior and everything. How do you see like mining, for example, it's such a net positive for the world. I would love your thoughts of just mining and just cleaning up these, because of the incentives of everything and how it's cleaning up society. It's mind blowing that this hasn't got further runway. Just, I feel like it's the least talked about part of Bitcoin, and it might have the most impact. It might battle the incentives and the reshaping the incentives like you just outlined. So it was making me think of that. But I love your thoughts on that actual energy usage in the mining world.
The way that I see mining, and this was actually maybe to answer one of your questions previously around kind of like what was one of those big moments of orange pilling. Now, I should say I was already deep down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, but when I understood the energy side of Bitcoin, it blew my mind wide open. I was just like, my God, this thing is incredible. And essentially, the way that kind of Harry describes it, or the way that I understand it, is that our grids always have to account for extremes. So in the summer, everyone turns on their heaters in the winter to be able to warm up the house. And again, we see energy usage double. And so because of this, you have to be producing enough energy to be able to account for maximum demand. And what that means is most of the time, we're only consuming 40 to 60% of that maximal demand, but we're still producing all of that energy to account for maximal demand. And so that 40 to 60% excess is just being dissipated. We don't have enough batteries to be able to store that energy. And even if we did, we can only store it for such a short amount of time. I think they say in the US, it's something along the lines of, if you were to actually store excess energy in batteries and then use those batteries to power the US, you would get something like 1 day of usage. And then it's just like those batteries are gone. So we just don't have enough battery capacity to actually make storing energy in batteries viable. And so the majority of energy that is produced, 40 to 60% of it, is just dissipated and wasted. And so what is so fascinating about Bitcoin is it's a variable load in that you can basically turn on and off very quickly. And so if during normal usage, not one of these maximal spikes where everyone turns on their AC, if during normal usage, Bitcoin miners are able to tap into the grid, pull this excess capacity, they can mine Bitcoin with it, generating cash flow. That cash flow, ultimately, let's just say it's an energy provider who is kind of running these miners. That cash flow can actually end up lowering the cost of energy for everyone else on the grid. We start to see this down in Texas with, I think it is it Ergon? I've forgotten the name of the name of the grid. Yeah. ERCOT and stuff. So what you start to see is Bitcoin, because of this variable load, is benefiting society because you're able to monetize this excess capacity that is basically, there's no other buyer for this energy. And so that, to me, the moment you realized, you can monetize energy that has no other buyer, that profoundly changed my perspective on Bitcoin. On top of that, it also means that if you're in countries like Venezuela, and you're in some remote area in Venezuela, and let's say it's got a strong little river, waterfall, somewhere to be able to kind of run a little bit of a dam, well, ultimately, the government's not going to invest in this kind of small little community to build a dam. It's just going to be way too costly, and it's not going to produce much of a benefit to Venezuela. So what we're now seeing is these smaller communities, if they're able to kind of raise a little bit of capital, build this dam, and then hook up the miners to that dam, they're able to generate revenue for these local communities. And so we're starting to see energy coming to these smaller communities, Africa, South America, that up until now, there was no incentive for the government to support those communities. And so I think Bitcoin, from the perspective of energy, is changing how we think about energy because it is a variable load that can be turned on and off very quickly. And so that does mean, I didn't really touch on it, that if all of a sudden we do start to see a massive spike in energy usage from the average individual because there's a cold snap or a hot spell, Bitcoin can just turn off. So it's not impacting the average individual. It's not like they can no longer gain access to that energy that the Bitcoin miners are consuming. And then the final point I'll kind of add on that is that we're also starting to see things like flare stacks in like the oil sands, where when there's a lot of like fracking or certain types of oil products, the output is liquid natural gas. The output is methane. The output are some of these kind of like gases that are unbelievably flammable and bad for our environments. And they're just kind of burning them off into the atmosphere. And what's so amazing is that up until now, it's been too costly to capture these gases, put them in a pipeline, send them somewhere else and try and sell them. And so we just burn them off. And what's amazing about Bitcoin is you can effectively, you've got a free energy source. So you're able to take this energy, bring a miner directly to the flare stack, and then capture that energy, reduce like something like 95, 99% of the particulate going up into the atmosphere, use that energy to run the miner and generate cash flow. So I think that there's amazing things that miners are doing to this world. I think we just got to step back from this idea that using energy is bad, because in general, like there's not a single low energy, high GDP country in the world. Naturally, GDP and energy consumption go hand in hand. If you want to increase quality of life, you need to increase energy consumption. And energy consumption is not bad. Everything needs energy. The wolf that is wandering through the wilderness is still going and eating animals to go and consume nutrition, to go and fuel its body. Like everything needs energy. And we just got to step back from thinking that energy consumption is bad.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, then check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.